The front door of my modest Hyde Park bungalow burst open with a force that nearly rattled the reading glasses off my nose. My daughter, Clara, flew into the living room, a whirlwind of flushed cheeks and vibrant energy against the cool March evening air. Her teacher's cardigan was askew, her eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen since she was a little girl on Christmas morning. "Dad, I'm engaged," Landon proposed. She thrust her left hand toward me. A modest, elegant diamond caught the warm glow of my table lamp, trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from the sheer force of her excitement. I set down my newspaper, the evening crossword completely forgotten, and rose from the worn leather chair that had molded to my shape over the years. "Clara, sweetheart." I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her practically vibrate with a joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. "When did this happen?" "Tonight," her words tumbled out in a breathless rush. "Right after school, he picked me up and drove to Zilker Park. He got down on one knee right by the old pecan tree, the one where we had our first picnic. Dad, I'm so happy I could just burst." I held her at arm's length, studying that radiant face. 28 years old, and she still had the same innocent smile of the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. She had her mother's eyes. Eleanor's eyes. "Show me his picture," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I settled back into my chair. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers dancing across the glass. "Here, this is from his social media. Isn't he handsome?" I adjusted my glasses and took the phone. The young man staring back at me had perfectly styled brown hair, a confident, almost arrogant smile, and wore what was clearly an expensive suit. But it wasn't his polished appearance that made my stomach clench into a tight, cold knot. It was the name beneath the photo, Landon Sterling. My weathered hands tightened their grip on the small device. The Sterlings. In the high-stakes world of Texas real estate and oil, that family name was both famous and infamous. I knew it all too well from my business dealings, though Clara had no idea about the corporate empire I commanded. To her, I was just Dad. Arthur Blackwood, a quiet retiree living a simple life on a fixed income. "Clara," I began, my voice losing its earlier warmth. "Are you sure about this? About him? This family?" Her brilliant smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I stared at the screen, memories of business reports and private investigations flooding my mind. The Sterling corruption scandal 3 years ago. Their son's drunk driving incident that had mysteriously vanished from court records. The family's reputation for ruthless tactics, and a belief that their wealth placed them above common decency. "The Sterlings have a reputation in this town," I said carefully. "For their business ethics and their personal behavior, there have been scandals." Clara snatched the phone from my hands, her expression shifting from confusion to a deep, wounded hurt. "How can you say that? You don't even know him." "Sweetheart, I'm just concerned." "Concerned about what? That someone actually wants to marry your daughter?" Her voice rose, laced with a pain I had rarely heard. "Landon loves me, Dad. He chose me, a simple elementary school teacher, over all the wealthy women his mother keeps throwing at him." I stood again, reaching for her, but she stepped back, as if my touch might burn her. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She clutched the phone to her chest like a shield. "You looked at one picture and decided he's not good enough. You don't know anything about him." The raw hurt in her voice cut me deeper than any corporate rival's betrayal ever could. I wanted to tell her everything about the lives and businesses the Sterlings had ruined. But I couldn't. Not like this. "I thought you would be happy for me," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, making them shine just like Eleanor's used to when she was angry. "I thought my father would celebrate with me." She grabbed her purse from the coffee table, her movements sharp and jerky. The front door slammed shut with a finality that seemed to shake the entire house, leaving me frozen in the sudden, deafening silence. For a long time after she left, the only sound in the house was the steady tick of the old mantel clock, each second marking another moment of the growing distance between my daughter and me. The silence was a physical weight. I sank back into my chair, feeling every one of my 68 years settle into my bones. My gaze drifted to the mantel, to the silver-framed photograph of Eleanor on our wedding day. Her smile, frozen in time, was full of a wisdom and patience I desperately needed now. I picked up the frame, the cool glass, a familiar comfort against my fingertips. "What would you have done, Eleanor?" I whispered to her image. "Would you have kept quiet? Let her walk into the fire just because she's drawn to the flame?" I knew the answer, of course. Eleanor was the surgeon's scalpel to my blunt instrument. She wouldn't have ambushed Clara with corporate gossip and vague warnings. She would have invited the boy for dinner. She would have observed, listened, and asked the kind of gentle questions that led people to reveal their own truths. "You can't protect her from everything, Arthur," I could almost hear her say. "Sometimes you have to let her make her own mistakes, and just be there to catch her when she falls." Her imagined voice settled the storm in my chest. She was right. A direct confrontation would only drive Clara further away, cementing me as the villain in her love story. But doing nothing felt like a betrayal of my promise to protect her. A new idea, a different kind of strategy, began to form. If I couldn't tell her the truth about Landon, perhaps I could create a stage where he would show it to her himself. The next morning, my hand hovered over the phone for an hour before I finally found the courage to dial. It rang 3 times, each one stretching into an eternity. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, guarded. "Clara," I cleared my throat, surprised by its roughness. "Sweetheart, I need to apologize. I was wrong last night. Not about my concerns, but about how I expressed them. You deserve celebration, not interrogation. I am so sorry." A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant chatter of children in her classroom. "You really hurt me, Dad," she finally said, her voice soft with lingering pain. "I know, and I want to make this right. Will you and Landon come for dinner this weekend? I'd like to get to know him properly." I heard the hope flood back into her voice. "Really? You'd do that?" "Of course. But," I added, choosing my next words with surgical precision, "I have one condition. Don't tell Landon anything about my old business life. As far as he's concerned, I'm just your retired father. Let him get to know me for who I am now, not who I was." "That's a little strange, Dad, but okay, if it's important to you." "It is," I said. "Very." After we hung up, the first phase of my plan was complete. The second phase began in my bedroom. I opened the walk-in closet, a space filled with the armor of my former life. Rows of expensive suits, Italian leather shoes, silk ties. I pushed them all aside, reaching for the clothes hidden in the very back. A pair of faded jeans, a simple button-down shirt, its collar slightly frayed. A well-worn cardigan Eleanor had knitted for me 15 years ago. This would be my uniform. Next, the safe, hidden behind a landscape painting of the Texas hill country. The heavy door swung open, revealing the tangible evidence of my success. I took off my platinum Rolex and placed it inside. The keys to the Mercedes and the BMW followed. From my wallet, I removed the platinum credit cards, leaving only a $20 bill. Arthur Blackwood, the retiree, wouldn't carry more. He would count every dollar. He would drive the 10-year-old Toyota Camry parked in the garage, the only car Clara ever saw me use. Dressed in my new identity, I looked at my reflection. The man staring back was a stranger, yet hauntingly familiar. He was the man I might have become if I hadn't built an empire. He looked tired. He looked ordinary. He looked perfect. I chose a restaurant called The Grove, a popular farm-to-table spot in Austin known for its good food but unpretentious atmosphere. It was the kind of place Clara loved, and the kind of place I knew Landon Sterling would secretly despise. I arrived a few minutes early, taking a small table in the corner where I could observe the entrance. When they walked in, the contrast was immediate. Clara, in a simple but elegant blue dress, scanned the room with a happy, open expression. Landon, however, surveyed the rustic decor and casually dressed patrons with a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. He moved with an air of entitlement, as if he were a prince forced to visit the peasant village. "Dad." Clara's face lit up when she saw me, and she rushed over to give me a hug. Over her shoulder, I saw Landon approach, his eyes doing a swift, dismissive calculation of my frayed shirt collar and worn jacket. "You must be Landon," I said, extending my hand. He took it with visible reluctance. The handshake was brief, his palms soft and manicured, the grip of a man who had never held a tool or lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure." His tone was the epitome of polite condescension, the kind of voice one uses with the waitstaff. The dinner was a masterclass in arrogance. Landon dominated the conversation from the moment we sat down, not by asking questions, but by delivering a monologue about his own importance. He talked about a recent ski trip to Aspen, the new BMW his father had just bought him, and the unbearable hassle of managing his trust fund. "Have you decided what you're ordering?" he asked, already snapping his fingers at a passing waiter. "I'm thinking the Wagyu steak. It's only $150 a plate, but life's too short for cheap food, right?" He glanced at me, a smirk playing on his lips. I scanned the menu with the careful consideration of a man counting his pennies. "The roasted chicken looks good," I said quietly. "Chicken's fine, I suppose," he said, then turned to the server. "We'll have a bottle of the Chateau Margaux." And for him, he gestured at me with his menu. "Just a water, I guess? Unless you'd like a beer, Mr. Blackwood. My treat." "Water is fine, son," I replied, maintaining my gentle smile. The casual cruelty continued throughout the meal. He spoke of his plans for Clara as if she were a new acquisition. "Don't you worry about her future," he said, patting my arm in a gesture of false reassurance. "She'll never have to worry about money again once she's a sterling. I'll give her everything you couldn't. A proper house, real vacations, designer clothes." Clara's face was turning a pale shade of pink. "Landon, please." "What? It's the truth," he said, draping an arm possessively around her shoulders. "Honey, I love your idealism, but let's be realistic. You say you don't need expensive things to be happy because you've never had them. Trust me, once you experience real luxury, you'll never want to go back to, well, to this." He made a vague gesture at my simple clothing. I watched my daughter shrink in her chair. The confident, joyful woman who had burst through my door weeks ago was being systematically diminished by the man who claimed to love her. He didn't see the brilliant, compassionate teacher she was. He saw a charity project, a beautiful, simple girl he could mold into a trophy wife. The final straw came when he pulled out his car keys and set them deliberately on the table, the silver logo of his luxury brand gleaming under the restaurant lights. "I know you want the best for your daughter, Mr. Blackwood. Well," he grinned, his confidence absolute, "I am the best." I set down my water glass with careful precision. The sound was soft, but in the tense silence that had fallen over our table, it felt like a gavel. "I need to leave now," I said quietly. Landon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Leave? But I'm buying dinner. The least you could do is stay and appreciate it." "Dad, wait," Clara pleaded, her face flushed with mortification. I stood up, my old joints protesting slightly. I looked directly at Landon, into the bewildered eyes of a young man who had never been dismissed by someone he considered his inferior. "I've learned everything I needed to know tonight." "Oh." Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my steps measured and calm. I didn't look back, but I could feel the weight of every gaze in the restaurant, and most of all, the weight of my daughter's dawning, heartbreaking realization. The 5 months that followed were a masterclass in silent endurance. Spring melted into the oppressive heat of a Texas summer, which then softened into the golden light of early autumn. Through it all, I kept my promise. No interference, no warnings, no attempts to change Clara's mind. I simply played my part, the quiet, agreeable father-in-law to be, watching from the sidelines as my daughter was slowly absorbed into the Sterling's world. Our phone calls became a painful ritual. Clara would describe the wedding preparations, her initial joy gradually being replaced by a strained, almost brittle enthusiasm. Her simple vision of a small, intimate ceremony at a local chapel had been systematically dismantled by Victoria Sterling. The guest list ballooned from 50 to 200. The local florist was dismissed in favor of an expensive event designer from Dallas. Clara's chosen menu was deemed insufficiently impressive. "Victoria just has such wonderful taste, Dad," she would say, a hint of apology in her voice. "She wants everything to be perfect for us." I would listen, murmur my agreement, and die a little inside. I knew what was happening. It wasn't a wedding being planned. It was a corporate merger, a public display of the Sterling family's power and influence, with my daughter as the beautiful, unassuming new asset. Landon, in the few times I was forced to interact with him, continued to treat me with the same casual disdain, seemingly convinced I was too simple-minded to notice his insults. Then, the day I had been dreading for 153 days finally arrived. I was awake before the first hint of dawn colored the Austin sky. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the profound silence of my house. This should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, a cold dread had settled in my stomach, a familiar weight I had carried since the night of that disastrous dinner. Today, I would have to smile. I would have to celebrate. I would have to watch my daughter, my only child, pledge her life to a man I knew would eventually break her heart. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection looked as weary as I felt. The lines around my mouth seemed deeper, my eyes shadowed with the weight of my long-kept secret. I shaved with a steady hand, a mechanical calm descending over me. This was the final act. I had to see it through. My costume for the day was laid out on the bed. The same threadbare suit, the same worn dress shoes. They felt less like clothes, and more like the uniform of a prisoner on the day of his execution. Beside them sat the wedding invitation, its gold embossing glinting in the early morning light like a mocking smile. And next to that, the silver-framed photo of Eleanor. "I wish you were here, Eleanor," I whispered, picking up the frame. "Clara needs her mother today. She needs your wisdom." I dressed slowly, the familiar textures of the old clothes. A strange comfort. This was the last time I would need this disguise. The thought brought no relief, only a profound sadness. In a few hours, the world would see a poor but proud father giving his daughter away. They would see a man grateful for the incredible fortune that had befallen his family. They would see a lie I had painstakingly constructed, a lie that was about to collapse in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. The Driscoll Hotel was not a church, but the Sterlings had transformed its grand ballroom into something resembling a cathedral of wealth. My 10-year-old Camry looked like a stray dog in the parking lot, surrounded by a gleaming pack of German luxury cars. As I walked through the ornate entrance, I was conscious of every scuff on my worn dress shoes, every loose thread on my outdated suit. The air inside hummed with the quiet chatter of Austin's elite and smelled overwhelmingly of expensive perfume and imported lilies. "Dad!" Clara's voice, bright with nervous excitement, cut through the noise. She floated toward me, a vision in an ivory silk gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. For a breathtaking moment, she was no longer just my daughter. She was a bride, radiant and impossibly beautiful. All my fears, all my carefully constructed plans, melted away in the face of her happiness. "Sweetheart, you look absolutely radiant," I said, embracing her carefully. "I'm so nervous," she whispered, her hands trembling in mine. "Is this normal?" "Perfectly normal," I reassured her, my voice thick with emotion. "Your mother was the same way." "There's my beautiful bride," Landon's voice boomed from behind us. He was resplendent in a tuxedo that likely cost more than my car. His smile was dazzling, but it faltered for a fraction of a second as his gaze fell upon me. "Ah, Mr. Blackwood, I see you found something appropriate to wear, after all." The insult was so smoothly delivered it almost sounded like a compliment. Clara's cheeks flushed pink, but she quickly smoothed over the tension. "He looks handsome, doesn't he?" "Of course," Landon said with a dismissive wave. "Vintage has its charms." Even the photographer seemed to understand the unspoken hierarchy. As he arranged us for the pre-ceremony photos, he politely asked me to step back a bit to stand slightly behind my daughter. I was a supporting character in this grand production, a quaint relic from a past she was about to leave behind. As the guests took their seats, the division was stark. On the left, Clara's world, her teacher colleagues in their Sunday best, a few cousins from out of state, our kindly neighbors. On the right, the Sterling's empire, investment bankers, real estate moguls, and women adorned with enough diamonds to fund a small country. It was two different universes colliding. Then the wedding march began. "It's time, Dad," Clara whispered, squeezing my arm. As we began our slow walk down the long, flower-lined aisle, I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me. I could hear their unspoken questions. Who was this ordinary, weathered man giving away such a beautiful bride to the Sterling heir? I held my head high, my focus entirely on the precious daughter by my side. In that moment, I wasn't a billionaire in disguise. I was simply a father, filled with an overwhelming love and a profound, bone-deep terror for what lay ahead. At the altar, Landon waited, his smile confident and proprietary. He looked like a man claiming a prize. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" my voice was steady as I replied, "I do." I kissed Clara's forehead, a silent prayer for her future, and placed her hand into Landon's. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Taking my seat in the front row, I watched my daughter promise to love, honor, and cherish a man I believed was incapable of doing the same for her. The ceremony was a flawless, expensive performance. And as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Justin dipping Clara back with theatrical passion, I knew the real ceremony, the one I had been planning for months, was about to begin. The reception was, as expected, an exercise in breathtaking excess. We were ushered from the ballroom where the ceremony took place into an even larger hall for the dinner. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and the tables were laden with towering floral arrangements and fine china that gleamed under the soft lighting. A string quartet played quietly in the corner, their classical music, a polite veneer over the hum of business deals and society gossip. I found my assigned seat at table 12, predictably situated near the back, a quiet little island for the bride's humble relations. From my vantage point, I could watch the whole performance. I saw my old friend Frank Miller, dressed in an equally modest suit, give me a nearly imperceptible nod before taking his own seat among Clara's teacher friends. He was the only other person in this room of 200 who knew the truth, a silent witness to my long game. As the champagne flowed, an announcement from the wedding coordinator silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the parents of the groom, Mr. Richard and a Victoria Sterling, arriving from their flight from Europe." They entered as if they owned the very air in the room. Victoria was a vision of calculated power, draped in a designer gown and enough diamonds to light up a small city. Richard followed, his presence commanding, his eyes sweeping the room with the cool appraisal of a man who buys and sells companies for a living. The room's energy shifted, gravitating toward them like iron filings to a magnet. Landon, beaming with pride, rushed to greet them. "Mom, Dad, you made it." "Darling, we wouldn't miss it for the world," Victoria said, embracing him with the careful air of someone protecting a $1,000 hairstyle. "Incredible, Dad," Landon was saying, his voice puffed up with self-importance as he gestured toward Clara. "She's perfect. Everything I wanted." Then his eyes found me in the back of the room. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. He took his mother's arm. "Come on," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "There's someone you have to meet." He led his parents through the maze of tables, a conquering prince showing off his new kingdom. They stopped before my chair, the three of them casting a literal and figurative shadow over me. I remained seated, my weathered hands folded calmly on the white tablecloth, and looked up into the smiling face of my new son-in-law. "Mom, Dad," Landon announced, his voice ringing with theatrical pleasure. "Let me introduce you to the annoying beggar we're forced to put up with." The words dropped into the polite chatter of the reception hall like a stone into a silent pond. A woman at the next table audibly gasped. A man choked on his champagne. The string quartet faltered for a moment, a single violin note souring in the suddenly tense air. The polite smiles on Richard and Victoria's faces froze, replaced by looks of confused embarrassment at their son's shocking breach of decorum. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound was the faint clatter of a fork slipping from someone's hand and hitting a china plate. The insult hung in the air, sharp and glittering and impossibly cruel. Landon's cruel words hung in the stunned silence. Richard Sterling looked mortified, but it was Victoria who took control. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features, the look of a CEO whose subordinate had just made a costly public error. "Landon, that's hardly appropriate," she chided, her voice sharp. "Oh, it's fine, Mom," Landon laughed, oblivious. "He's used to it. Aren't you, Mr. Blackwood?" But his mother was no longer listening to him. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, the eyes that had built a real estate empire, were fixed on my face. The initial embarrassment on her features was being replaced by something else. A deep, analytical concentration. I could practically see the gears turning in her formidable mind as she sifted through a mental database of thousands of faces from boardrooms, galas, and high-stakes negotiations. "Excuse me," she said, her voice losing its socialite lilt and taking on a focused corporate edge, "but haven't we met before?" Justin laughed nervously. "Mom, trust me, you haven't. He's nobody. Just Clara's father." I met Victoria's gaze steadily, my own expression a perfect mask of polite neutrality. "I doubt it, ma'am. I'm sure I would remember meeting someone as distinguished as yourself." My denial only seemed to fuel her certainty. Her frown deepened. She was a predator who had caught a familiar scent. "No," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "No, I'm certain. It was recent, actually. A video conference. The final closing on the acquisition." Her hand moved unconsciously to the diamonds at her throat as the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving a stark white canvas beneath her expensive makeup. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, the diamond on her finger flashing like a warning light. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, her voice a horrified whisper that somehow carried across the entire silent hall. You're him." She took an involuntary step back, as if struck by a physical force. "Aren't you? You're Arthur Blackwood, the reclusive tycoon, the one who just acquired Sterling Holdings." The name dropped into the room like a bomb. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then, from Landon's nerveless fingers, his crystal wine glass slipped. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling end over end before shattering on the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed through the hall, a sound that was perfectly symbolic of Landon's world breaking into a million irreparable pieces. "What?" The word escaped Landon's lips, a strangled, pathetic croak. I rose slowly from my chair, my movements deliberate, my old suit suddenly feeling not like a costume of poverty, but a mantle of judgment. I looked directly at Victoria, whose face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Yes, Victoria," I said, my voice calm and clear, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "That was me." A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed by a rising tidal wave of frantic whispers. Phones appeared as if by magic, fingers flying across screens as 200 of Austin's most powerful people desperately searched for the name Arthur Blackwood. And as they did, the story of the mysterious, media-shy billionaire, who had quietly become the most powerful man in Texas, began to flash across their screens, illuminating the sheer magnitude of the disaster that had just befallen the Sterling family. Landon stared at the glittering shards of his broken wine glass as if they were the ruins of his entire life. His perfectly styled hair was now disheveled from where he'd run his hands through it in frantic disbelief. "No, no, that's impossible," he stammered, his eyes wide with a terror that was deeply satisfying to witness. "You're poor. You live in that tiny house. You wear that." He gestured wildly at my suit. "Yes," I said, my voice cutting through his panicked rambling. "I have heard your many observations about my lifestyle. I chose that tiny house and these old clothes for a very specific reason, Landon. To see what kind of man my daughter was marrying when he thought no one of importance was watching. From the bridal table, Clara watched us, her face a pale mask of confusion. At my side, Richard Whitmore looked as if he was calculating the catastrophic financial damage his son had just inflicted on their family. But it was Landon who finally broke. His mind, unable to process the total annihilation of his worldview, latched onto the most pathetic lie imaginable. I can explain everything," he suddenly blurted out, his voice high and thin. "I was testing you. Yes, that's it. I was testing you. I wanted to make sure you'd love Clara for herself, not for her family's connection to me. I was protecting her." The lie was so transparently absurd that a ripple of incredulous laughter went through the room. Even his own mother, Victoria, looked away in second-hand embarrassment. The society photographer, smelling the story of a lifetime, moved closer, his camera flashing relentlessly, capturing every moment of this spectacular social implosion. Seeing his lie had failed, Landon's composure finally shattered completely. The arrogant prince vanished, replaced by a desperate, terrified child. He stumbled forward and dropped to his knees in his $5,000 tuxedo, grabbing at the leg of my worn trousers like a drowning man clutching at driftwood. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, Arthur, please," he sobbed, tears and champagne staining the front of his designer shirt. "Please, I didn't know. I swear I never would have said those things if I'd known who you were. I can change. I'll do anything. Please forgive me." The entire room was a theater of silent, fascinated horror. Phone cameras were held aloft, recording the heir to the sterling fortune groveling on the marble floor before the man he had called a beggar. I looked down at his desperate face, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear sense of finality. There was no remorse in his eyes, only the primal fear of consequences. He wasn't sorry for his cruelty. He was only sorry that he had been cruel to the wrong person. "Stand up, Landon," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Begging doesn't suit you." He scrambled to his feet, his face flushed red with a humiliation so profound it was almost difficult to watch. Almost. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied. "You spent 5 months demonstrating your character to me. You believe wealth gives you the right to disrespect others. You believe kindness is a weakness. You believe my daughter is a prize to be owned, not a partner to be cherished." I gently but firmly removed his grasping hands from my sleeve. "Character isn't something you can put on and take off like an expensive suit, Landon. It's who you are in the dark, and I have seen exactly who you are." Richard and Victoria Sterling were now at their son's side, their faces pale with a mixture of fury and desperation. Richard, ever the businessman, finally stepped forward, attempting to salvage the unsalvageable. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, his voice strained with forced civility. "Surely we can discuss this like reasonable men. There may have been some misunderstandings." "There have been no misunderstandings, Richard," I replied, my voice calm. "Your son has been exceptionally clear about his feelings for the past 5 months. He showed me exactly who he is when he believed I was powerless to respond. My attention, however, was on my daughter. Clara had made her way from the bridal table, her beautiful wedding gown now seeming like a costume in a tragedy. She stood frozen between her new husband and her father, her eyes wide with 1,000 unspoken questions. "Dad?" Her voice was a fragile whisper. "I don't understand. A billionaire? Stone Industries? Why didn't you ever tell me?" I turned to face her, my heart aching at the confusion and hurt in her expression. This was the moment of truth, not just for the Sterlings, but for us. "Because I wanted you to have a normal life, sweetheart," I said, my voice softening. "I wanted you to grow up valuing people for their character, not their bank accounts. I wanted you to love me for being your father, not for what I owned. And," I paused, my gaze shifting to Landon, who was still trembling beside her, "I wanted you to marry a man who would treasure you for your kindness and your brilliant heart, not someone who saw you as another trophy for his collection." The truth of my words seemed to settle over her. I could see the memories of the past 5 months replaying in her mind: Landon's casual cruelties, his obsession with status, his dismissal of everything she valued, all of it now cast in a new, horrifying light. "Mr. Blackwood, please," Victoria interjected, her voice pleading. "Justin is young. He's made a terrible mistake. On behalf of our family, I sincerely apologize." "Apologize to yourselves, Victoria," I said, turning back to them. "You raised him. You taught him that wealth makes him superior. Tonight, he's simply learned that some of the beggars he looks down upon might just own his entire world." I had said everything I needed to say. The performance was over. I started to walk slowly toward the grand exit of the ballroom, the silence of the room broken only by the frantic clicking of the photographer's camera. "Dad, please don't leave," Clara cried, taking a hesitant step after me. "We can work this out. Landon will apologize properly. Won't you, Landon?" Her new husband nodded frantically, his eyes darting between me and the crowd of whispering guests. "Yes, yes. I'll do whatever you want. Please, just give me another chance." I paused at the threshold, my hand on the ornate doorframe, and looked back at my daughter. Her face was a portrait of heartbreak and conflict. I had to give her the choice. It had to be hers. "Clara," I said, my voice carrying across the silent hall, "you are an adult, and you have made your choice today. I will always respect that. But I will not stand by and watch my only child be married to a man who believes cruelty is a form of entertainment. I looked from her to Landon, and then to his parents. You know where I live. You know that I love you more than anything in this world. The rest is up to you. The grand doors of the hotel whispered shut behind me, cutting off the sound of the chaos I had unleashed. The cool September evening air felt like a clean slate against my skin. Above, the Texas sky was a vast expanse of deep indigo, littered with stars that seemed indifferent to the human dramas playing out below. The contrast between the suffocating opulence of the ballroom and the quiet dignity of the night was immense. I walked toward my modest Camry, its humble frame, a stark silhouette among the polished luxury vehicles. It was no longer a piece of my disguise. It was a symbol of the simple, honest life I had tried to give my daughter, a life built on values that money could not buy. The engine turned over with its familiar, reliable rumble. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I took one last look in the rearview mirror at the glowing hotel, a gilded cage where my daughter was now facing an impossible choice. But the choice was hers to make. I had given her the truth, the greatest and most painful gift a parent can offer. Driving through the quiet, sleeping streets of Austin, I felt the weight of the last 5 months, and indeed, the last 28 years begin to lift from my shoulders. The heavy cloak of secrecy I had worn for so long had been shed. I was no longer playing a part. I wasn't the struggling retiree, and I wasn't the corporate titan. I was just Arthur Blackwood, a father who had done what he believed was right to protect his child. My plan had never been about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This had been about clarity. I had simply created a vacuum, a space where Landon's character could reveal itself, uninfluenced by the power and prestige he hid behind. And it had, spectacularly. I didn't know what Clara would do. Perhaps she would stay, try to salvage a marriage built on a foundation of lies. Or perhaps she would find the strength to walk away, to choose her own self-worth over the glittering promises of the sterling fortune. Whatever she decided, I knew I had done my part. I had held up a mirror, and now it was up to her to see the reflection for what it was. Pulling into my own quiet driveway in Hyde Park, I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the peaceful silence. The light was on in my living room, casting a warm, welcoming glow. It was a simple home, but it was real. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely and utterly free. In the end, the true measure of a person is never found in the grand declarations they make in the spotlight, but in the quiet choices they make in the shadows. It is revealed in how they treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. True love cannot be bought or owned. It must be earned through a currency of mutual respect and unwavering kindness. For it is character, not wealth. That is the only true legacy we can ever hope to build. We are all faced with these truths in our own lives. Thank you for following this story. What are your thoughts on the choices made? Please share your impressions in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that touch the heart.